welcome to another episode of Between the Lines, where we explore the intersection of local and national issues. Each episode will be talking about a different subject with two guests from the community. I'm your host, Eben Diskin, the founder and editor of the Townie, a online publication for local opinion pieces. And today we'll be talking about political discourse and how, while it might be civic, it's not always exactly civil, both locally here in Newburyport and nationally. And to help us, we've got two great guests, Bernie Cullen. Bernie is currently on the Rowley Water Board and is an active participant in local issues ranging from housing needs to the Triton School District Budget and the Whittier building project. He received a NATO fellowship for his doctoral work in organizational behavior at Harvard University. And sitting next to him, we've got Byron Lane. Byron is a Newburyport native and business owner, currently serving as the city's Ward 6 councilor. He's decided not to run for office again this November, partly due to the tone of the discourse around some recent local issues. So he's in nothing to lose mode right now.
I mean, that's always. I'm always.
He's always in nothing to lose mode. Thank you both for being here. Let's start there. I think most of us can agree that we live in a very politically divisive time right now, at least here in the U.S. But I wonder sometimes if that division isn't due to the merits of the issues themselves, but more to the manner in which they're discussed. And Byron, I want to start with your experience and perspective on this as it relates to Newburyport's rec center, because this is an issue that we've all just voted on and dealt with.
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough one. It was really a contentious issue in town, which, you know, I was saying it towards the end of it, you know, it's real sad that something that's called a community center can fracture a community like it did. You know, there's no question they are a great asset to our community and a great department, and they do a lot of wonderful things and I'm sure help a lot of kids. The problem is that there was a lot of other things that people had concerns over. So it's kind of goes back to the initial discourse and the national tone is what's important to people. And at this point, we're seeing it's less the underlying issue, and it's more of it's my way or the highway, which is really, I think, the problem in society these days is that everybody wants to dig their heels in and they don't want to listen to the other side. So when you stop listening, you lose a lot. I've always been open, you know, when I first, let me tell you a little story about when I first started council. There was a councilor that wanted to meet for coffee, and I said, sure, I'll meet you for coffee, you know, and get to know people, and I was excited and brand new and, you know, still green and wanted to know, you know, all the experiences of everybody I'm going to be working with. And that individual slid across a piece of paper, and it was a quote that said, I hope to do a lot of good things for the people in Newburyport and the city I love. And he said, what's this mean? And I said, it's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, I want to do good things. I love this city. I grew up here, and I'm heavily invested in it. I have a lot of pride when it comes to Newburyport. And he said, well, you'll find that there's different factions. I don't know if factions was the word, but different sides, I think he said. He said, so what side are you on? And I took a sip of my coffee. I gathered myself, and I said, well, let me tell you. I said, there might be this side, and there might be this side, but I'm on this side, so there's a third team in town. I said, I don't play games. I don't play. I have to vote with this certain group of people. I have to vote this certain way because this is what I'm expected to do because this is why I was elected. And I think sometimes that gets a little blurred, and people run with these expectations that you have to do this. So you're elected to be a yes vote on this issue. And we did see that a little bit with youth services. That was a big push and it doesn't take much to figure it out. You can see who wants what and who's pushing for which candidate and why. And so I'm not a rubber stamp for anything. I'm not opposed to anything coming out of the gate. I've always had the vision of I want to hear everything. I want to hear all sides and then make the best decision, what I think is best for the residents that I serve.
Right. You think that would be kind of the perspective that any potential government
that's
worker
the way it
would
should
want
be.
to come to any issue with. But it seems like, so specifically about the rec center, you know, I think the idea of a rec center, a place for everyone in the community to come together where kids can, you know, have resources, they can pickleball courts or basketball courts or a gym and whatever and play. Everyone's pretty much on board with that,
Yeah.
right? So what was it that made it such a divisive issue, and specifically that turned you off of city government? It's one of the main reasons why you decided not to
No,
run again.
you know what? I wouldn't say it's one of the main reasons. I've been through the last 6 years. We've done a lot of
Culmination
hard
things.
things.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't pinpoint it as that. It's more of I've been here for 6 years. I just need a break. My son's 12. He's getting into, you know, competitive sports now, and I look back and I sacrificed a lot of things that impacted my relationship with him. So for the next 6 years while he's, you know, through high school, I want to be there for all his sports and have more of an active role. He lives in Wakefield with his mother, and so I see him, you know, when I can, basically. We don't, you know, we're really lucky because he and his mother, rather, and I get along like unbelievably. People are like, you guys are weird. Because because we get along so well. And a lot of it goes back to this main conversation of hearing what's important to him, to her, and doing always what's best in mind for him.
Right.
So when you think about it, you can equate the child as the city. So it's not that you know, and if you look at like how most relationships go, and you know, breakups, one parent is, you know, just in spite mode, just want to spite the other person because they can't stand them, blah blah blah, and the other person, you know, they're gonna do something just to get that fire going. So is there a correlation between the two? For sure. Because there's a lot of things that I see that come up in council that, yeah, you know what, they have hard feelings against the other person. And I've never carried that. And it's funny because Councilor Donahue and I, we've had some issues on the floor and you know, gone back and forth, and never crazy, but you know, just back and forth. But Jenny and I grew up in Newburyport. Old school Newburyport was different. So I remember one night we went back and forth, and it get a little bit heated, and then at the end of the night, another counselor was walking out with Jenny, and we were all walking out, and I said, Jenny, you know, I still love you. And she said, no, I know, it's all good. And the other counselor looked at us and was like, you guys are crazy. But that's just how it is. You know, that's how it always has been. Newburyport, for me, growing up here, my favorite thing about Newburyport was the community. It was, I moved from Oakland Street to Milk Street, and if you know anything about Newburyport, I moved basically over the tracks. The South End was not what it is today, and it was much different. So I had to really acclimate myself with a big change and quite literally fight my way through it a few times. So that's more of, even though we didn't, you know, it was tough. It was home. It was a community. I mean, I knew every single person that lived in every single house, up and down the streets, and everybody looked out for each other.
So given the sense of community and how it might have changed, how does an issue like the rec center that had been pretty divisive, what did you see that do to the community as far as putting people on two different sides,
It's awful.
whether it's the council itself, from your first person perspective, or just the community as a whole?
I mean,
And
most
why
of
do
it,
you think
you know,
people got
most of it was
so
social media.
invested?
I didn't get involved with any of the threads. You know, my thing was I voted to have the vote, send it to the people, because that was the best way. Let the people decide. But I did see a lot of discourse, I guess you'll say, online, and it got nasty some points. And there was things that were posted on there that, you know, I remember one post was like, oh, if you're, you know, a no vote is absolutely against youth services. That's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people have different priorities in their life, and none of us have exactly lockstep the same views as each other.
Or that you don't like kids, or that you're against
Yeah,
kids.
yeah. Well, that was. I had to get up every time I had to speak to it. I had to stand up and say, "Let me preface this with I don't hate kids. I'm a father, and I love my son, and I love kids." I was a preschool teacher in college, for crying out loud. Like, kids are great, and I understand the value of, especially in today's day and age. There's a lot of kids that need help, and they're just all attached to their, to the internet. And I mean, you think about what we see on the internet, and we're like, whoa. And now with AI, forget it. It's just, people just believe whatever they see.
Who's actually saying it?
Yeah.
And it's some kind of Lego-built position based upon AI extracting.
Yeah, I mean, beyond. I mean, it's tricky. I mean, it's funny, if you go onto my Facebook, you'll see I posted this reel that I saw, and it was like these three news reporters, and one of them was, there was a flood, and she's standing like this tall, saying, "I'm so-and-so with so-and-so news," and I'm completely made up. And then all of a sudden, like a great white shark comes up and swims right by her. And the next one was, I'm so-and-so with, KTV 11 News out of San Francisco. And then they show like an alien in the back coming out of the, this is a developing story. And then she says, and I'm completely made up.
Yeah.
And the third one, completely, like, it was just all completely generated. And if you looked at it, you wouldn't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I teach my son he'll go on to like, reels or whatever, like, mostly baseball training stuff, whatever, but you never know. Like, and I tell him, just know that everything you see might not be real.
Yeah. Yeah, even a year ago, I prided myself on being one of those people who I would never get fooled by AI. Like, I know better. I'll be able to spot the difference. And every day I see something, and then I'm like, oh my God, that's not real. It's getting me. It's going to get everybody.
Right. I guess to connect some of these dots, I mean, one of the things about discourse is, are you just speaking, or are you asking questions, and are you listening? And listening is always very, very much harder than you think, because everybody listens, right? But do they?
Right.
And so I think part of the dynamic is asking questions. But in order to ask questions, the prerequisite is that you have a certain respect for the other person's point of view, because if you ask a question and are not interested in what they're saying, you're not listening, and the question is essentially, are you pinging the person, asking the question to put them on the spot, or are you really interested in a dialogue? And I think that's one of the really difficult aspects. And the counter to that is so many, until recently, until I would say until Trump showed up, basically, people were too polite. They would never ask questions that might possibly cause some embarrassment to somebody. Not that you're trying to cause embarrassment, but the very nature of the question could lead that way. And so posing questions, and tough questions, is an art, because you're not trying to put the person on the spot. You're really trying to start the dialogue, rather than just having two puppets kind of talking to each other, or like a Punch and Judy show. I mean, that's not really what is going to move the ball forward in terms of getting to a solution. Because I think the rec centre sounds, as you've described it, I wasn't directly involved in it, but there are two sides to it, two legitimate sides, two really kind of sides which require exploration and discussion, because if there was ever going to be a compromise where, instead of 50% of the people being satisfied with the outcome, 70% of the people would be satisfied with the outcome, it was going to require a fair amount of discussion and an exploration of opportunities, even though in some instances it ultimately ends up as some kind of binary choice. Either you're going to do the building or you're not going to do the building. I mean,
but there's a trick there. because a lot of people weren't comfortable saying no because of the reason that they would be told that they were against the program, against kids, you know, heartless, or, you know, whatever people were out there throwing these terms around. And it just wasn't the case, which that's what, excuse me, that's what really got me. You know, we went around and around and around on this issue for a long, I mean, it's been around for a long time. And I just saw, I mean, like, when I have to stand up and say I don't hate kids, imagine how anybody that wanted to put like a campaign sign in front of their house that said no, you know, just the natural snap of, oh, they're, you know, whatever, they're awful, they're, you know, bad people, they don't support
I would
kids.
hear that from people,
Yeah, and that's just not how it was. It's different priorities. Like,
Well,
you
and
know,
the issue is, it's not a binary issue. It's much more complex. So, in a certain sense, the vote requires a yes or a vote yes or a vote no. The issue is that much more complex, and somebody who says no they may be 52% no and 48% yes.
if there was a better solution there, I'm going to tell you right now, there was a much better solution to make everybody happy. That's the other piece of it that I was along for the entire ride. We would have these conversations. We did have a group. We looked at different sites, and the site that won wasn't the best, but it kept getting pushed to the top. And it was just the way things have gone in the report that I've seen is, this is the way it's going to be, and this is what we're going to do. The train's going to leave the station, and it's going to arrive at the next station. There's no alternative transportation to get there. There's no other better track. This is what we want, and we're going to get what we want.
And is that because people ultimately vote for it to be that way, or is it because the people that are in opposition don't feel comfortable voicing their opposition for a variety of reasons?
You've got political factions in the report that push their own agendas. And they're going to listen to their leaders, and they're going to say, okay, that's what we want, that's what we're going to back. And I don't know whether it's they assume that there was solutions vetted out a little bit better than they are, but it's kind of like I'll go back to my favorite thing in the report, the garage. Hate the garage. I got involved with politics because of the garage. And when the garage was presented one night up in the auditorium at City Hall, it was, here it is, and that's that. And I remember looking around the room, that's that. Like, isn't there a discussion here to be had? Isn't there a better solution? Isn't there better? And there was better locations, there was better options, but that was what it was going to be. And there was no other alternative. So you end up with like a take it or leave it situation.
And ultimately, people voted for that, though. They voted for that location. They voted for
That was
to move forward.
no, that was a council vote.
Okay.
I believe, yeah, that was a
So
council.
the public
public didn't vote on the.
That was a conversation for like
Did they
10
vote
plus
on the-
years.
No, I don't believe they voted on that garage. I can't remember.
I wasn't there. Got nothing to do with
but
it. Wash my
if
hands.
there's no viable alternative presented, then
Can't
people
remember
are
if
going
there
to
was a
vote
vote.
for.
I just know that it was. Yeah, I don't think that went to a vote. I could be mistaken, but at any rate,
Yeah, well,
it was done. I mean, it was just not the right place, not the right location. You know, not the right time. Spent a lot of money, and you know, I tell a lot of people, like, you know, Newburyport, the big push there was, but we're going to get this funding. We're going to get $4 million from the state to do this, and you know, that if we don't act now, we're going to lose this money. So we are the masters of buy 3 get 1 free when you didn't even need one to begin with.
so you think there's a lack of public?
I want to steal that one.
It's true. You know, it's like I don't
There's a lack
care
of public
about.
consensus on issues, and
Yeah.
then they get bulldozed through, and it's a kind of a, well, something is better than nothing, but then that something isn't actually adding value in the way that it could if a public consensus was struck the right way.
As soon as we bought that land, there was no stopping that youth center from being built on Low Street. Some way, shape, or form, it was going to get done. And no matter how it was represented over time, and oh no, it's going to be parks. We're going to buy this for parks now. I mean, I didn't vote for the land. Had nothing to do with youth services. It's the fact that I've been in real estate for 12 years, and the test borings weren't done. And I remember when I was in middle school, 5th grade, I would sit on the bus waiting to go home, and there would be tanks lined up all on Low Street to get repaired. Mm-hmm. Heavy machinery from the Army and the National Guard all came here to get it done, to the point where I went home one day and asked my mother if we were at war. In 5th grade, are we at war? And my mother, I remember, she was like, no, why? And I'm like, well, there was all these tanks lined up when I was leaving. Oh, that's where they fix all the machinery. So I look at that land, and I'm like, the amount of lead, the amount of diesel, the amount of hydraulic fluid, everything that's in the land.
PFAS.
You remember the Great Battle of Newburyport in the 90s? No? That's what all the tanks were for.
Well, yeah. Right, exactly.
Little known conflict in the Gulf War. There's really one here.
But
there was less conflicts then than there is now, let me tell you.
But I want to just piggyback on something Byron said, which was about the voting. The voting can be... The powers that be understand how votes get constructed. So the Whittier is a great example. So why in God's earth did we have a vote on January the 24th in the middle of winter for or against the spending of to vote for or against a $450 million project? And why is it that vote was instead of what it basically says in the Whittier Agreement, all 11 communities have to agree, it was one vote. Everybody's vote counting the same. Even though Haverhill was 40% of the voters came from Haverhill. So I was part of that discussion, so I understood what the Whittier board was kind of school board and what the Whittier administration was essentially trying to do. But even though it was a vote, it was essentially depriving the communities of their opportunity to make a decision. Just turned out that it all broke exactly the way that we would have hoped, which was 10 out of the 11 communities, 10 voted against it, and 1 voted for it, and that 1 voted for it was the city, Haverhill, which was going to be the huge beneficiary. And it was in Rowley, where we were active, it was 94% voted against.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You've got to be able to read that dynamic before you kind of just blow your reputation, and that's kind of like the people who are making. So there's this other part of this whole process, which is the powers that be, the institutions that essentially have to organize and manage many of the activities. They have their own agendas that are completely independent, frequently, of the people who are actually going to pay the bill.
It's funny you mentioned that, because one community led the charge in getting in no on Whittier, Newburyport. Right?
Sean Reardon did a good job.
So what kind of got stuck in my craw was, I was like, it's too much money. I didn't like it at all, up and down. I mean, there was one bid, it reeked to high heaven. You know what I mean? It was just, and there was a piece to it that, there was $25 million for a water treatment facility for Whittier itself. Well, now you're really gonna kick me below the belt and be like, fix your water problem. Stop dumping CSOs into the river. It was nothing more than a Band-Aid for their CSO problem, and to get around that, because you're adding, all that would be adding to the problem that was underlying, so they included that in. There was a lot of things that with Whittier I didn't like, but when Newburyport was all against it, and one of the main reasons was our taxes. We need to slow down on our taxes. we need to pump the brakes here. It's out of control. We can't be adding this much and the burden to the taxpayer. So that vote happened. 6 months removed, we're telling everybody we can build an $8.5 million rec center. So
Yeah.
what I didn't like about that was we told 30 kids no to tell 30 kids yes. And granted, I'm going to get blasted for saying it's 30 kids, but we told a group of kids no to tell another group of kids yes. How do you do that with the argument of we need to rein in our taxes and there's things that we need to fix with our infrastructure? I mean, that's been my biggest battle is infrastructure.
Yeah, I think people can create a permission structure for themselves to vote for whatever aligns with their best interests,
Yeah.
even if it requires a degree of cognitive dissonance and it goes contrary to another issue that they voted against. So I think that's kind of the common thing that we're talking about here. And
Well, but we're two reasonable guys, so we may disagree on many things.
Sure.
But my guess is that even though we're maybe diametrically opposed on a particular issue, we're not going to. I don't feel as though it would be appropriate or under any circumstances to throw an insult in your direction.
No.
That just doesn't make. It doesn't make sense. Even under the camouflage of doing it on social media, I'm not going to call people names.
No, it's not personal.
Right. Yeah, you understand that these things are different. I mean, when the civic discussion that's most current in Rowley was we had to deal with 3A, and 3A, for people who may not be familiar, it's a state requirement that you set aside a certain number of acres in your town where you can, by right, build multifamily units, as against whatever the other zoning is that you have. In this instance, Newburyport is very different from Rowley. In Rowley, we have the primary zoning is acre zoning. Essentially, if you want to build a home, you need an acre with certain 150 feet of frontage, et cetera, et cetera. Given the cost of single-family homes, even in Newburyport, that sets the bar very high, which makes it very difficult to essentially generate affordable housing.
3A wasn't fair for a lot of communities.
Right. The 3A was required us to add enough housing that would increase the size of the town by 25%, potentially. But people didn't understand what zoning was. People didn't understand that it didn't mean we were building houses. They didn't understand an awful lot. But before you knew it, the sides had locked horns, and it was a lot of fury going on, added to the fact that somebody was telling Rowley, a town that has a very kind of deep conservative background, what they can and can't do, and the state was doing it. And so a lot of the resistance was largely because the state was imposing this on Rowley. Now, my initial view, I didn't think 3A was terrible legislation. It was a terrible idea. There were many other ways of kind of moving the towns in the right direction to build more affordable housing. But it was a done deal. It was so you had to decide you were going to fight the state, and so part of the discussion in town, in Rowley, was there were a group of people with good intentions. I shared their view that this wasn't the state's business. We knew better how to handle this problem than the state did. But at a certain point, the law is the law, and the state controls the incentives and disincentives. So you better make a decision to get on board. And part of the fierce dialogue was because some people just refused to acknowledge that was the aspect of reality that we had to deal with. So even though I was opposed to this 3A in zoning approach in principle, and then the 3A operationalizing in practice, I ended up working hard to kind of get 3A passed because we needed to not be on the naughty list as far as the state was concerned. And if you're on the naughty list with the state, you are in trouble. You because they all talk to each other. They have more common interests in making sure the towns toe the line than they do preserving their own kind of particular agenda.
We'll talk about the public tenor of the conversation surrounding the issue. Was it pretty divisive? Was it mostly online, on social media, that people were arguing? How does that compare to what we just talked about with the rec center?
It was certainly on social media, and that was the most obvious. But even I went to a lot of the planning meetings because you had to come up with a plan, and the individuals who attended those meetings were very strong in the positions that they were taking, and it was very difficult to kind of have a real dialogue. It was always, the yeses would speak and then the noes would speak, and it would flip backwards and forwards. So it was very difficult to kind of have a constructive session. The planning group, the Merrimack Valley Planning Consortium, did set up a workshop where they kind of laid out maps of the town, and people had a chance to kind of plot things out. That was probably the most constructive episode in the entire debate, because at least people kind of put stuff on the table. Did it change anybody's minds? I don't think so, because
Nobody's minds change these days.
But in essence, if you have a principle, if you have an issue that the state should not be interfering in the local zoning, it's hard to find out what the compromise position is, given the presenting case, given that it's 3A, as opposed to taking a step back and saying, under what conditions would you consider accepting the state designing a particular aspect of your zoning?
What do you think, even with the right amount of education around the issue, or any issue, to what extent do you think people's minds can be changed on anything? Because I think when people learn about an issue, they immediately decide how they feel about it. And then I think 2% of those people are open to persuasion. And I think it's almost a matter of pride for a lot of people, of standing your ground no matter what that means and not changing your mind. And I think the issue is understanding. No one wants to understand each other or the other side. They want to win. And to win, it means the other side has to be wrong.
You just got, that's just it with our country, locally, nationally, wherever you want to go. People are so dug into the ground at this point. They hate people they don't know for no reason. It's baffling to me. I mean, I see it. People, if you voted this way, I hate you. Mm-hmm. You are an awful person if you voted this way. If you voted this way, you are whatever. Mm-hmm. Fill in the blanks. And nobody's open to listening to the other one's perspective. And, I mean, I get it. When it comes to people's lives and lifestyle choices, how they want to live their life, let people be. Mm-hmm. It doesn't impact you. It doesn't unless it impacts you directly. You shouldn't be telling people how to live. That's just the way I am. I mean, everybody can have their own perspective and their own point of view. Great. As long as you're not harming somebody else, so be it. There's some things in there that I won't get too deep into the weeds with you about that are questionable in terms of legality and morality, but you've now got just complete people out there classifying based on they have no facts about this other person, but they don't like him because of they back so and so, or they're for this, and
Well, people attach their identities
Yeah.
to issues. They attach other people's identities to issues.
awful.
So if you don't support the rec center, you don't care about kids. If you don't support accessible bike share program, right, then you have a bias against people with disabilities. And you know, you can do the same nationally with immigration. If you support sanctuary cities, you support immigration invasion. It's just everything is hyperbolic and everything is
It's funny.
is
Yeah.
personal.
You bring
and
up the
emotional.
bike share conversation. Was that?
Go on.
Sure. So you know, we had the issue in council when that came across, and there was funding for 2 additional bikes, and it got heated, and one councilor said something to another councilor, and there was a censure issue, and I think it's still on the table. So be careful what I say, but. To me, and I had conversations with a lot of people involved, and they're like, "Well, what's up with that? Like, how can you be against this?" And it's not. So the issues get lost in the mud because we've gone down so many different paths where it turns to this personal thing that.
I mean, the merits of the issue get lost in the emotionalization of the issue.
And I think it's there's a lot of concern about. The budget and how much we're into and what we have for projects on the docket, and that was a lot of people's concern was the water line issue, the water safety in Newburyport and the reservoir, the Indian Hill, I believe it's phase 2, which bypasses the lower artichoke, but it was a huge concern to people. So now you're putting it's one or the other, right? And it's only one or the other because of the decisions that we've made in the past. This building right here would have been a great youth center too. You could have easily, when you did this building, put a gym on the back and made enough room to satisfy both at once. You would have satisfied our senior residents and our kids all in one swoop. If we had done that when we could have, we would probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. We'd be talking about something else, right?
Right.
But because we've made these decisions and we've spent, my big thing, Waterfront Park to me, stop. I was like, stop spending money on Waterfront Park. Like, that's a nice thing to have, and I don't know what 4 acres of lawn is going to do for the city at the tune of $19 million. When I asked for the numbers, I almost fell over. I said I want the numbers of everything we put into the waterfront, including the garage, total cost, and it was in the area of $19 million over time. $19 million for 4 acres of lawn and some Adirondack chairs and a sculpture.
I think it's hard to sell people though it's hard to get people to conceptualize money in a budget when you're voting, when you have a flashy new object like a rec center or like a waterfront park that I think if you asked most people, they'd say they think it looks great and that there's a good,
I think it looks
good
great.
job and people love it. And the money in the budget is so abstract to them that it's hard to draw the connecting line between, okay, well, this is going to cost, a rec center is going to cost us this much. That's going to be between $20 and $50 per family per year or whatever they said it is. And that doesn't sound like that much in the big scheme of things. So, okay, sure, why not? And I think it's easy to get people to go further and further down that road until eventually maybe they've spent all their money.
Cup of coffee a month.
Right. That's that. As soon as somebody mentions a cup of coffee a month, my antenna go way, way up, because that's essentially using numbers in inappropriate fashion.
But then if you're someone who says, well, I don't want to spend the money on it, then you become someone who doesn't care about the beauty of the waterfront or of the resources for children or whatever it might be. And maybe on the merits, maybe those issues actually should get passed through, or maybe that park should be built. But the emotionalization and the you don't care about this is who you are as a person because you oppose or support this, that's where I think the issue is. It's like the debate needs to stay on the merits and not get personal or identitarian.
Right. Yeah. I guess, part of my kind of college background was most of our education was done in small seminar groups. So twice a week, we would have to sit down with our peers and then with an instructor, and you had to support your position. And over the course of the years, you kind of, that emotional, that's kind of attaching any personal emotion to it got knocked out of you. Everything had to be kind of treated in a much more kind of concrete, objective, dispassionate view. Because it wasn't only your peers, that was the intent of the professors as well. He was kind of trying to make you listen to the other side and get you to articulate your position as clearly as possible.
You think that was owing to the small class sizes?
That's
being more
small
one-on-one?
class sizes, but plus that's the intent. That's the intent. And what's interesting is when I came to grad school here, and there was a different dynamic. Not so much in the seminars, but in the lectures, people would be standing up to perform, basically. It was like, I'm going to make an argument, and I'm going to persuade you by the fierceness of my rhetoric that I'm right and you should agree with me. So I go back to this notion of, people don't ask questions. So your question about, well, how much did the park cost? That's a perfectly reasonable question. But that question, my guess is that question in and of itself got people to be defensive. They just would say, well, I don't want to say how much it, because they already knew. They basically knew, even if it cost a lot. They still knew that what those ballpark numbers were going to be.
You never could get you never get the right answer.
Right. So
It depends on how you want to chop the pie.
Yes.
Right.
So asking, you're never going to get your full answer from asking the first question. It's a dialogue. It's kind of a number of questions being asked, and each time you ask that question, if you're getting closer to the core issue, then people will get very defensive. I can remember one instance when I get involved in the Triton budget, and I remember there being a proposal that there needs to be a cut at Triton. And the cut was they have a great video department, production department, but it's servicing a small number of students. And the issue is, well, do you cut that or the AP class, an AP class? That may be doing the same number of people, but the actual cost of it and the fungibility of the person running the class is very different. But that immediately sparked this huge kind of emotional reaction, similar to you're not interested in education, you're not interested in kids, etc., etc. And all you're basically pointing out is you don't have an endless budget. What are the stopping rules for the size of the budget that you want to pursue? The same thing happened at Whittier. But nested in that is the kind of things that are essentially fail a credibility test. So in the Whittier case, Whittier was basically maintaining that their building was in terrible shape. Well, and if you say that and haven't been to Whittier, you basically accept, well, it must be in terrible shape. Well, but it isn't, because I've been there and I've walked all the corridors. Do they have problems? Yes. Is it an old building? It's 50 years old. Yeah, sure, it has problems. But now go to Triton and look at the shape of Triton. And now you compare Triton and Whittier, and you basically say, God, Triton's a dump. Whittier looks like somebody's cared for it. And so without that additional information, and getting behind the kind of gross representations which are really directed at selling something, you kind of get this complete misrepresentation of reality. So Rowley has to fund Whittier and it has to fund Triton, just like Newburyport has to fund the different educational institutions.
Yeah.
But you need something grounded. In large measure, I'm the only person who shows up at the Triton's, out of a member of the public who hasn't an item on the agenda. I'm the only person who shows up at the Triton School Board meetings. I'm the only person who shows up at the Whittier School Board meetings. The actual level of engagement is sufficiently low that I can argue that nobody has the facts. Nobody has the important data that they need in order to genuinely participate in the discussions. And I couldn't participate in the rec building meeting, discussion, debate, because I haven't got the foggiest clue. So,
well, then it doesn't stop people from voting and forming factions on an
Right.
issue that they don't fully understand,
Yeah.
which I think is what people do on most issues.
yeah,
Well, there's a lot more cost. Like with the rec center, it wasn't like, that was that. Oh, it made like the hair on the back of my neck. The cup of seriously, the cup of coffee a month, like. It's not a cup of coffee a month.
Right.
It's another capital expense. I mean, it needs, staff. It needs maintenance. It's going to need things down the road. I mean, you look at, and the other, and this was, I think you touched on at one point, the calculator we had on the website for the city.
Oh yeah,
That drove me nuts too.
Mhm.
And I mean, the other publication in town kind of like ran a separate way with it, and I was like, no, I wasn't like, I wasn't trying to be this, that, the other thing. I had genuine questions because I tried it myself. I'm going to try everything that's going on. When they say, here, go and check out this calculator, it's going to tell you exactly what your share is going to be a year. I mean, that's just not true. Yeah, to your direct tax bill, sure, but when you can't look at it as just, this is all you're going to pay for it. It's the budget as a whole.
Mhm.
So it's going to take, maintenance, things to be done down the road. When they had the high school debt exclusion falling off, so they were like, oh, well, here's what it is, but this debt exclusion is falling off of your taxes, so this will go away. What they're not telling you is there's probably another $6 million at this point, at 30 years later, that needs to go back into the high school.
yeah.
So it's a shell game, essentially, is what it is.
It's a ratchet.
Yeah,
It
we're not
goes
gonna,
up.
this falls off so we can replace it with this. Well, no, what's wrong with having it fall off and assessing where we're at compared to other,
Right.
what other things need to be done in the city? And I guess, like I said, when we're the masters of, once it's out of the train's out of the station, it's gone.
Well, why can't we have that conversation? I mean, why can't, as a city, as a council, why can't that, what you just said, why are there so many people willing to turn a blind eye to that?
I have no idea. People want what they want, and they don't take into account other people in the community. And that was, I
What is said- you
did
bring
have
that
a little bit of mud thrown at me by a candidate not too long ago that's coming out saying, that I was assumptive and, I don't know what my people want. And I find that very comical because I know everybody on every, not everybody on every street, but I can name you at least 5 people on every street. And I talked to quite a few people when it came to the rec center. And that's what really got me, solidified in, there's got to be a better way that we're not going to impact taxes. And it wasn't so much that it was the impact of that, it's the impact of everything else that we're doing that's going to raise taxes, and why taxes have gone up, 26, 28% in the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. And people are going to say, oh, it's the assessments and this, that, the other thing. I have a huge problem with assessments too, because you should never take market value into the equation. And now they do. And that's a state thing. So the state's getting you through your local municipalities on your assessment. Every couple of years, they're going to reassess you. I mean, my taxes went from $5,500 to over $9,000 in a couple
Jeez.
years.
Yeah.
And newsflash, I'm a single male householder in Newburyport as a parent. I'm less than 1.5% of this population. I am the minority here. It's hard for people to live in the city I love, where I grew up, and so I get a lot of calls from residents people that I've known forever that live in my ward, and they're scared. Fixed incomes, and then you mix in at the same time when we're talking about building that new building, pouring gas in the fire, saying they might get rid of Social Security. People were calling me in tears. It was sad. Like, I had a number of residents, in tears on the phone. Where am I going to go? What am I going to do?
Well, see, and there isn't a way to emotionalize the issue on the no side of the rec center, which you just didn't really see. But there's a way to do it, and it just didn't, on this particular issue, it didn't really seem to, the conversation didn't shape up that way.
No.
But
I just, like I said, I think it's great. I don't think it was the right time. I think there was other solutions that we could have done. It just was never open to conversation, and nobody wanted to hear it. And I'm not gonna get personally mad at people because of it. And you showed me who you are. Some people out there showed me who they were, and that's good enough for me. Like, now I've learned, right? You lose, you learn. So. And I don't even consider it a loss. Like, I love Andy. She does good work. The staff at NYS is great. They're an awesome asset to our community. We're lucky to have them.
right.
It's just there's other things that go into the mix that we've spent money on, or we're gonna have to spend money on, that maybe there was a better solution. And I didn't like the way it was just buy the land, just keep pushing, push.
The tone of the debate
it
was,
just
and I think a lot of times the issue, this is the problem. The issue becomes the tone rather than the merits of the issue itself.
Correct.
And that becomes the conversation.
Correct.
It is how you're relating to people in your community that disagree with you, and that's what
that's
we're talking
what I was
about.
talking about with the bikes, with the $9,000 that that we had that whole thing on the floor where we got heated and
I think,
it's like you're losing sight of what's underlying here. Right. So for $9,000 to have a bike that's tandem for disabled people to be able to use just like anybody else, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Like $9,000, it's pretty much, for me, it was like, I think it's a great idea. I don't understand. But because of the fact of the way the conversation went with the bike share program, no public funds were going to be used in this pilot program. And there was some other councilors that were like, you told us it wasn't going to come down to public funds. And granted, like, so I remember this. I was sitting there watching the whole thing, and I'm like, somebody give me some popcorn, because this is interesting. But I can understand. I know where everybody was coming from.
Right. And I don't want to be naive. Like, I know that the personalization of issues and people taking issues to an emotional level is not a new thing. It's been happening for decades, but it does seem, especially on a national level, that has become normalized to a degree that it hasn't been to this level in a while. The normalization of kind of demonizing the other side who you don't agree with, the lack of interest in coming to real understanding of someone else's viewpoint, and just forcing yours down their throat or casting them as the antagonist. And I think you see it trickle down locally, even though the stakes might not be as high.
But the other thing too, it's like, you might watch the council meeting on Zoom or wherever you're watching, and you think it's getting heated. It's only heated because there's a level of friendship among the councilors. So it's
comfortability.
What you see. So it's kind of like, I equate it to the problem is that we have 11 councilors. Find me a family of 11 that doesn't argue like cats and dogs, or agrees on everything altogether. Too many cooks in the kitchen, number one. Number two is, you're always going to have different viewpoints. If you look at the demographic of the council as a whole, they come from completely different places.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing that I've always seen is you respect each other. So you might get heated at a certain meeting, but in the same breath, you could go down to the park lunch and have a drink afterward and just talk.
Well, that's probably not evident to most people who watch.
But so you see the show,
right?
But you don't. People draw their conclusion saying, "Oh man, there's so much discourse on the council." Well, it's less than you think. It's more discourse in the issues than it is with the personalities, which is good.
I think they relate it to what they see on a national level too. When they watch TV, and you see people on different sides who disagree with each other.
Twitter and social media. I mean, you see all these sides blasting each other. What people don't understand is they get paid per click.
Right.
They're influencers.
I had an interesting discussion basically last night when a friend of mine, we were at a planning board meeting, and we're both on the Rowley Affordable Housing Partnership Committee, which is designed really to kind of help generate interest out there in the developer community to build housing which is affordable. And he had asked somebody to be a friend on Facebook, and they came back and said, well, I'm not going to be a friend of yours on Facebook because you have these opinions. And I was kind of aghast, because I try to interact with people from a huge variety of different viewpoints, because I know one thing, and that's that I don't know everything, and that my immediate knee-jerk response to something may not be right. And
I don't think most people would be able to admit that.
Well, right. So then you say, well, where does that come from? And it can come from. I mean, I think some of our national political figures have not helped matters, but it's up to the individuals to kind of step up and say, ask a question. And if the question means that you're displaying the fact that you don't know something you really should, then fine, take your lumps. But you've got to be confident enough in your ability to manage your own thought processes and your own emotions to be willing to ask those questions. And you've got to be willing to be wrong. And if you're not willing to be wrong, why are you discussing anything? Because you already know you're right.
The strongest superpower you can have is changing your mind.
Yeah, and
the strongest people can change their mind.
I've changed my mind about you.
Usually people do. Usually one way or the other. So.
Well, my last question was going to be: how do you have conversations with people that you disagree with, and how are you open to changing your mind, and how do you approach a political conversation with a person who you staunchly disagree with, even on an ideological level? But I think you pretty much just answered that, and you as well. And unfortunately, we do. I
mean, just to give you an example, like just a quick one. We had a meeting about NYS, and that was the one where I kind of, I said, okay, I'm the bad guy, and then there was an event right afterward, and I had to walk into a room full of people that were all in support of it, and I didn't hesitate, because I don't judge my personal relationships on views. I treat everybody with kindness and respect, and that's at the end of the day where I come from, and I don't hold grudges. So
it's genuine respect. I mean, it sometimes can be in short supply, too short supply.
Yep.
Yeah. Understanding. I think that's it. Just curiosity and understanding.
I had one guy when I had the problem with my back. Just to end this real quick, and I had a guy. I had a resident email me, you should step down, you don't show up to anything. And meanwhile, I got the wound vacuum pump, I'm at home, I'm like, close to death. And I sent him an email back, and, I said, but, if there's anything I can ever do for you, please let me know. And I saw him, and he's like, I can't believe that, he goes, I felt so awful. By saying that I didn't know, and, when you ever wrote back to me, and, you said if I could ever help you in the future, he's like, that was cool. He's like, that was,
Yeah,
he goes,
no,
I can't
treating
believe that,
people
but that's the way I am. I'm not gonna,
understanding and grace. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
we only get one life to live.
Exactly.
So, you know.
All right. I think that's a good place to wrap up.
Sure.
Thanks for listening to Between the Lines. I want to thank our guests, Byron and Bernie, for being here, and also Sarah Hayden, head of NCM Studios, and our producer, Mae Power. We will catch you guys next month. Thanks.